I think perseverance is one word that you'll hear throughout now the ages, right? Of how important it is to persevere. We will see and encounter a lot of failures. We'll get a lot of headcount. We'll be facing a lot of adversity throughout careers. Well, that is critical, and we have to make sure we overcome that. And where does that come from? It comes from the fact that we want to persevere, want to continue growing.
Welcome to the CEO Sessions, hosted by Ben Fanning. And here's Ben.
Welcome to today's show. I have Victor Guzman, President and General Manager at Melnor. The company was founded in 1946 and specializes in designing and marketing high-quality hose and watering tools for the home gardening space. Now, during the pandemic, which at the time of this recording we are in, home improvement projects have been going crazy, at least in my neighborhood, and I believe that is holding true across the nation. And Melnor has been providing a lot of irrigation tools. So if you have irrigation in your yard, if you have a sprinkler system, you are probably running across a Melnor product there. But back to Victor. Victor is an operations leader known for strategic thought leadership with a positive track record for functional transformations. He has functional expertise in distribution, digital order to cash, warehouse operations, transportation, and more. He's held senior leader positions at MedPharma Partners, Mallenckrodt Pharmaceuticals, Getinge, A.T. Kearney, and Honeywell, where I worked for him for a stint. Victor has a master's and a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from MIT. And what you'll discover today in this episode, the time Victor had to cycle in the Pyrenees in northern Spain to prove himself to his cousins. A funny story there. What's behind Melnor's enormous business growth during the COVID-19 lockdown? I just gave you a little preview of that. Victor's rise from Mexico City, where he grew up, to MIT, to the C-suite, and what it's like being one of only 4% of C-suite leaders who are Latino. What your first step should be in any crisis, and it starts with making two lists, and Victor sheds a little light on that. What former Honeywell CEO Dave Cote, who we've also had on the show, told Victor about dealing with uncertainty. The surprising thing an employee should ask when they're experiencing a burnout. When starting in a new role, how long should it take for you to get up to speed? And then we'll wrap up with some interesting insights around why there's no shame in being fired. Enjoy the show. Hey, Victor, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Ben. Really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, this is going to be great. So for those listeners, I think you need to know something about Victor, as I used to actually work for this guy. And because of that, he's now president of a company. Congratulations. I'm just kidding. He's you all can't see him. He's nodding his head. He's like, sure, Ben. Yeah. He actually hired me and brought me into a company, to Honeywell. And I really appreciate that. And I went on, I think, to do pretty good stuff. And so is he. And I am delighted for you, Victor, to share with the listeners today a little bit about your background, which is fascinating, and your career. But let's talk about the super hot issue right now of cycling in northern Spain and why everyone needs to try that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's a hilly place in the Pyrenees, and it's one of those things that folks there sure follow the local soccer team. So one of the big things about all the younger people is that they belong to these cycling clubs. And during the weekends, what they typically do is that they jump on their bicycles and go for a ride. Right. Well, I grew up in Mexico, actually, but I had family in northern Spain, and I would go and visit them every summer. And I remember I would get there and my cousins would be like, hey, are you ready to go cycling tomorrow? Right. And I would be like, where do you want to go? And they would look out the window and say, you see that mountain? I said, yeah. Well, how about going to the top and coming down? And I would say to them, well, how long a ride? Say it's not long. It's like, maybe 10 kilometers. Right. But it was just an absolute steep climb. And this is the Pyrenees, where you're going straight uphill. Many times you go past the clouds. and it's a real test of endurance. So I did that several times. It was a very, very good, activity, and you learn a lot. You learn a lot by yourself, because these folks would get on a pace. I would say anywhere from 11, 13 kilometers an hour pace, a cadence of at least 80 cycles, and they would just pedal up, continue going for a good hour and a half.
Wow, straight up.
Right. And then you get there and you kind of sit down, and after your legs start, shaking, you kind of, compose yourself, and you head downstream, which is just basically, a 100, kilometer per hour ride without any corners, and can actually be more dangerous than the way up. But it was very enjoyable. Very enjoyable.
Training that you did beforehand, or did you just show up and do it with your cousins?
I would show up, and that was the activity. They were looking forward for me to do it. They always took out-of-towners and put them through the, steepest mountains to see what they were made of. And they would always get to the end before you and look like nothing had happened. By the time you got there, you were panting with your, covered in sweat. But after a few times, I learned how to do it.
Wow, cool. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I always remember you coming back with these crazy adventure stories of biking up there. Is there any specific, I'm trying to just give a little more context for the listeners. Is there a specific region in Spain that you'd recommend the cycling to? Was it Galicia or?
This particular place is, Basque Spain. And it's, and these towns, it's all really around the different towns. One town is the town of Aspetia. Basically, these towns sit in a valley, and then they're surrounded by these mountains. There isn't really a dedicated bike path type of road. You have to really share the road with cars. But in general, the cars are very respectful of riders. You don't find the kind of the group of the peloton of 30 to 40 riders. They're all groups of 2 or 3. And it's a big cycling culture. So everyone knows if you stop and you need help, if you ring on someone's door, they'll come out and they'll help you. The police is constantly patrolling up and down, waiting for riders who may need assistance. So it's a common activity there, and I think there's a couple of large teams like Tour de France that actually practice there in the early spring.
And thanks for that. So y'all heard it first from Victor Guzman right here. Northern Spain biking trials and tribulations. Imagine if your family was challenging you to go up straight up the hill. All right, so just give them maybe like a tiny snapshot about Victor's president of Melnor. Maybe give them a little bit of snapshot. I thought it was really interesting on what's been happening to your business going on for your business since the pandemic hit. So they can just get a little bit of that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that every business Ben is right now dealing with. At the beginning, we were affected first and foremost because a large portion of our supply comes from Asia. So for those who are part of that,
they don't know your company, by the way. So maybe give them a little bit about what you guys do too.
Okay, yeah, it's a good point. Melnor is a 75-year-old American-based company that has been in the lawn and watering business since then. It was founded by 2 basically GIs who came back from Europe and with the desire to start a new company, and thought that lawn care just after World War II would be the best way to go. And they actually were very successful, invented a set of new products, and became a regular household brand for many, many American homes. So if you own or in the past, if you go down to your basement and you find your old lawn care equipment, you may find a Melnor oscillating sprinkler in there. We were so popular at the time that Norman Rockwell actually painted our product with the consumer smiling and excited. Good. Nowadays, basically, we consider ourselves one of the larger brands selling through the omni-channel, Home Depot, Lowe's, major regional hardware stores to consumers who are interested again in lawn care. Key products are oscillating sprinklers, watering nozzles, and timers. There's a whole bunch of accessories, but those would be the three main categories. We also have a growing presence through Amazon, and we're finding that experience is skyrocketing, especially with the pandemic. So initially, back to your question, Ben, what happened was that we had a plan, as all companies do, around Chinese New Year. If you recall, COVID actually started in Asia and China, and they were the first ones to lock down. So the lockdown forced us to plan for supply, and they went from what was originally a 3-week Chinese New Year break to actually a 6 to 7, depending on the region. So we really had to plan accordingly. And coming out of that, 6 or 7 weeks later, we started, shipping like crazy, so to speak, and building our inventories. From our perspective, that was necessary. It went well. If you recall, next in line affected was Europe. Italy and Spain very much went into lockdown with a lot of very sad news coming out of two regions. But together with the lockdown was retail. And so we have a couple of customers there that basically came back and said, we're shutting down. We're not accepting shipments anymore. And in fact, we may, go on an extended payment for you. And so that told us enough of what could happen here. So we had a little bit of heads up. And then ultimately, things started happening here in the U.S. So the first thing was general lockdown, driven, by the different states. And as that was happening, different governors started identifying essential businesses. And one of them was Home Depot, for example. They were identified as an essential business. Lawn and garden in the state of Virginia, according to Executive Order 53 or 54, was identified as an essential business, which allowed us to stay open. And interestingly, all the employees were fearful. Fear has been one of the issues about this pandemic, and fearful, and they wanted to stay home. Upon seeing that we were deemed essential and we're going to operate, a lot of folks were hesitant to go into the office and were pursuing really a work from home alternative. Interestingly, Melnor historically has had a no work from home policy. So we effectively asked employees to come into the office, or if they were uncomfortable, take vacation time. But we did. We continued, going on. And suddenly in late April, early May, things went just crazy. At that time, the lockdown had been in effect for a while. And so two things were happening. Home projects were a big deal. Home and gardening was effectively an activity that everyone was doing at home if they could. And they needed equipment. They needed all kinds of equipment and tools. And we were providing that. So the omni-channel as well as Amazon just went crazy. And we've had actually record months in June, May, June, and July. June especially, which is the peak of the summertime and everyone really getting out there, compounded with this effect of the shutdown.
Yes, you're one of those businesses that really benefited from the whole pandemic. I mean, because one, you're able to work with your employees to come up with a flexible solution for them to come into work safely, right? And then yes, the skyrocketing demand that was way above your plan, right? You guys weren't you weren't planning for the positive explosion and everybody working from home, doing home gardens. I mean, our neighborhood has exploded with home improvement projects. I mean, it's crazy.
Right.
And so you guys benefited from that. And so what a great move for you. This is something big for you because you stepped in the presidency role pretty much right before this happened, right?
That's correct. My first day was May the 1st. So it was like getting in there and saying, hey, by the way, you're going to have a whole new set of challenges ahead of you. But, at least from starting that role, it was good that I already had some time as a vice president of operations. So I knew the operations quite intimately. Mm-hmm. But interestingly, Ben, I think the number one challenge was really around managing the workforce and keeping everyone, if you will, inspired and in stride and making sure that they felt safe and productive during the pandemic. Our volumes went crazy.
Yeah.
And our issues were not necessarily more issues, or were the same issues, but much larger. Long story short, we went on crisis mode, which was, what do we need to stop doing? Just list everything you need to stop doing. What do we need to start doing or do more of? And make sure we focused our activities. And one thing was clearly to handle the volumes, increase the workforce in the warehouse, right? So that actually almost went up 4 times. And associated with that was just bringing in temps and making sure that they were safe. So we were early adopters of the scanning temperatures upon coming in and making sure that everyone was wearing a face mask. Very unusual scene in the warehouse, but now it seems like it was just a normal process.
Yeah, now it's normal. Well, so congrats on those moves. That we call that baptism by fire. Where I come from in Alabama, yeah, you were VP of Ops, now you're president of the whole company, and now we're going to throw a pandemic at you. But it sounds like you've navigated it really well. Where did you grow up in Mexico?
Mexico City.
So I've been to Mexico City. I've spent several months there. That is a big, big city. What was it like growing up there? And did you ever think in your mind that you'd ever be CEO of a company in the U.S. when you were a kid?
Busy, as you point out. It's a large city, so there's definitely a lot of things going on. Fairly cosmopolitan through the years. I was very fortunate in terms of my dad. He was an avid golfer, and so we grew up in a town actually that had a golf club, and so that for me was a very good experience. And I had an opportunity also to go to an English-speaking high school. And that was very helpful in learning the language as well as learning the culture. Did I ever dream about, being in the C-suite? Yes. Dreamt, yes. But did I plan on it, or did I think it was going to happen? Absolutely not. I did see myself going into business. My family were all business owners. So an entrepreneurial, if you will, career was almost expected. But, you never know what, life brings to you, and definitely have to take advantage of opportunities.
So how old were you when you came to the U.S.? Was it college?
It was college. Yeah, I came to do my undergrad. Correct.
And then you stayed after that, right?
Pretty much. I stayed. I did work globally. I did work actually in Latin America. I did work a short period of time in Europe, but mostly in the U.S.
All right. So people that are living in other countries and they're thinking about, hey, coming to the U.S., I want to be a business owner, or, hey, I want to move my way up. I can see myself like a vision to the top. What advice would you give to them?
It's a very timely question. So what advice would I give someone in those shoes, right? And it's probably the same advice I would give anyone. But the first thing I would say is follow the rules, right? There's just too much media that tells us otherwise. There's all these success stories telling us about how achieving success can happen by breaking the rules. And actually, my track record has been very different, right? Following the rules, and good things will come from that.
What rules?
The other thing.
Do you have any rules that come to mind that you see people breaking that you recommend them not breaking?
I don't necessarily mean breaking the law.
Okay.
That's not what I'm talking about.
All right.
Or adopting corruption. No, that's not what I mean. What I mean is that sometimes there's a set of business rules, and when opportunity hits one, you're willing to shift things around a little bit. And what I have found is that at least in my own journey, I developed what described as a business acumen, and so you're true to that. And the next piece of advice that I would give everyone is follow your values throughout. You got to decide what you want to stand for, but you got to be the real person on and off the job, at home, with your friends, always, and that will always yield great benefits.
Is there any specific value that comes up that you say, hey, this one value has really been one that I really believe in, that everyone needs to think about for themselves?
There's a few. There's a few that I have found out in business really take you far, right? The first one is treat others the way you like to be treated. Can't say enough about that. Can't say enough about the fact that, you want to make sure that people will see through the fact that if you don't treat them the way you're treating others, or you treat certain people you're managing up, for example, they'll resent that. They'll see right through you right away, right? I think the other one is that I find very useful, and it's always a very important piece, is empathy. The importance of showing empathy at work, right? Everyone, including myself, of course, will make a mistake, right? The question is not how they get punished. The question is how they bounce back, how they recover, right? And that's one thing that everyone goes through a journey of building their own confidence. Confidence in an individual is one of the most important things. If you want to grow a supervisor to a manager, to a director, and a vice president, one of the big traits is that that person now is confident. And where does confidence come from? It comes from the fact that they can fail, but they will recover.
Yeah, I like those. Makes a lot of sense. And, being in integrity with those, I think, people, one, you feel better, you feel congruent with your values when you act in them, but two, like you're saying, you're sending a message to your other employees. One of the unique things about you, on a different note, we talked about you coming from Mexico, but I was doing a little research on this beforehand, and according to Fast Company, Latinos make up only 4% of the U.S. executive level positions, and so you are in a small group there, my friend. Sort of speaking to all minority employees that have a vision for rising and getting promoted in their career, what tips or strategies do you have for them?
I think from my experience, what has really worked is that you really pursue what you want to pursue from what you like, what keeps you up, if you will, every day, and you want to make sure you're not just compromising. And what that means is that you go and you do a job that you like to do. Number one,
that's number one.
That's number one, right? And you're not necessarily just saying, I'm going to go and I'm going to work on something that, is going to bring me great wealth. Well, yeah, money is definitely necessary. But when that is kind of pursued as its own objective, that's where I think a lot of the temptations in one's life come in. That's very important.
Something, so no matter, not just minority, but general employees, stick to, you're recommending, hey, stick to the kind of work that you like doing, versus getting sucked down another career path. Is that right?
That's correct. Perseverance. I think perseverance is one word that you'll hear throughout now the ages, right? How important it is to persevere. We will see and encounter a lot of failures. We'll get a lot of headcount. We'll be facing a lot of adversity throughout careers. Well, that is critical, and we have to make sure we overcome that. Where does that come from? It comes from the fact that we want to persevere, want to continue growing. And we also the third thing is make sure you always keep the well-being of the company and the employees in mind, right? There's always a great element in what's in it, what's right for me, but you would find that great leaders really want to make sure that they're doing the right thing for their company and for their employees.
Great. Good stuff there, Victor. Now let's talk a little bit about your engineering background, because you think of MIT, you think about, some really high intellect engineers, and you went through that experience, but then you got into the whole operations thing. And I'm curious, thinking about people that are maybe pursuing engineering or thinking about doing engineering, but they also want to be a leader in the company. What advice, I'll tell you, maybe speak from your own experience. How did having an engineering background help you get to the C-suite?
Sure. And, it's one of those where, in hindsight, I really didn't go to get a chemical engineer's degree at MIT because I knew I was going to be in C-suite. It didn't work that way.
I imagine that.
Actually, you asked the question, why did I even pursue engineering from the get-go? And, that's a very telling story I like to share, because my dad, actually, who was an entrepreneur, had a dire need of engineering. and engineering work in general. And so he would say to me, just if I had the right talent in engineering, I think I would get further. And that was a big source of inspiration for me, right? That, we can potentially grow into that role. Well, life definitely takes us in different directions. And when I basically graduated from MIT, I did go to work as an engineer, right? And I was very fortunate in that I was able to lay out a new process, a new basically chemical process with equipment and, with throughput and all those great things, right? And I felt it was, early on in my career, it was a great achievement to be able to practice, if you will, and my engineering discipline through a project. But the site manager at the time, who was a great mentor to me, said, "Hey, Victor, what are you going to do now that this is running? Are you going to spend the rest of your life just improving it, or what do you think?" Right? And I said to him, he was a German guy. He said, "Max, I don't know. What do you think?" And he goes, "Well, I actually think you ought to migrate to the operational side of the business, and I think you'll really enjoy it." Right? At the time, I may have been, 28 or 29. So I said, "That's a great idea. What does that mean?" He goes, "Well, basically, you're going to become an operations supervisor, and you're going to lead folks, and you're actually not going to be responsible for operating the part of the business or the process that you built. How does that sound?" That sounds great. So the first thing he does is that he puts me on the night shift as a supervisor to deal with, you can just imagine, real challenges. So that was a completely different experience for me. But because there were a number of things.
Support, right? And you're more on your own at night. You got to figure things out for yourself when you're on the night shift.
But the one things, I guess, in reflecting back on that experience, of course, but on where I, what I do today, I think that the first thing is learning to learn, right? An engineering degree requires a lot of independent study, and learning to learn was a very important part of my, if you will, career in general. When we get setbacks, we have to reinvent ourselves, and we need to learn how to reinvent ourselves, right? Problem solving is a big thing on engineering backgrounds, and the ability to be able to problem solve is critical. Creativeness, right? I value a trait or a behavior that I would describe as intuitive thinking in employees, whereby maybe original ideas, but if you will, perspective on their work and what they're doing is important. And then finally, the importance of being thorough. I think there's always, in a good businessman, the need to be thorough and make sure that we do our homework.
So in your career after that, you went on, you've worked for several different companies, right? You've been a consultant. You have been, worked throughout different organizations. And what advice do you have for employees who are in the situation where they're just going from one organization to the next? Should they worry about going to too many different companies? Has it been an advantage? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I guess I think the first thing, Ben, is that we all coming to the terms of the fact that there's no more cradle to grave employment. I mean, that's something of the past, and most of us in the workplace will have probably switched jobs several times, to your point. So the idea of working in different groups within a company or different companies in different settings is going to be something that we have to deal with. Mm-hmm. So based on my own experience, the first thing that I would share with anyone is the importance of learning the job quickly. Make sure you figure out what it is you have to do, right? And that comes at a different set of levels. But one of the things I do with my new employees typically is I put them through a 30, 60, 90-day plan. And it's interesting how...
I remember that plan, by the way, from when I would work for you. I could probably recite it, but I want to hear what you're going to say. I remember that, actually.
It's interesting how, without getting into so many details of the first 30 and 60 days, by the 90th day, the employee should have a pretty good kind of idea of what it is the course they're on, and especially what kind of either changes or improvements they can do to the role. When they bring that opinion and you feel that the opinion is a fairly good and well balanced, informed opinion, they did their homework. So that's one thing that I would certainly encourage folks going on.
That makes a lot of sense, because when you think about it, for those listening, when the president brings you into the company, you're not making them any money, right? They're investing in you to bring you on board. You don't even know where the bathrooms are on day one. And so Victor's approach is by day 90, and I don't know if this is your perspective, Victor, but I'm imagining you're thinking by day 90, you're going to start to see a return back from that employee, but only if they learn the job as quickly as possible. Is that aligned? Okay.
Correct. That is correct. That's well said, Ben. Absolutely. The other thing is also prove your value, right? And deliver on commitments. I think that part of the experience we all have in going into a new role is the fact that we have to deal with the supervisor, deal with peers, and how we feel about a new role is so important. How we feel when we go home every day is very important. And if we go in proving our value and delivering our commitments, those are the more visible pieces, right? Because what is it that our peers and even our supervisor has to judge us by is the consistency between what we say we're going to do and what we actually do and deliver on.
I love that. And that goes back to your point earlier about talking about the importance of having integrity and congruence with what you say and what you do. And you even talked about doing it, hey, the same person. And then I think this is a big challenge for a lot of people, is being the same person in the boardroom as you are with your employees, as same person you are with your friends and family, or else you're probably risking burnout, huh?
Correct.
Correct. Well, looking back at your career, what's one thing you might have done differently? Or say young Victor bebopping in from MIT, starting his career, is there anything that you'd say, or would you say, hey, don't forget this 20 years from now? What would you say? You already unloaded a lot of tips, but
there's a couple of things I can share in hindsight, which is, and I think I read this from one of the famed business gurus. Make sure you're always going to work with people you like. I can't say enough of that. Right.
What if that'd be great, but what if you can't work with people you like? Do you just leave? If you're the president, maybe you can make some changes, but
that's a general statement, Ben, you like, right? But it has different pieces to it.
Okay.
It has a piece of trust. It has a piece of sharing success. It has a piece of respect. Because you're not going to be able to always agree with everyone. You're not going to have always the same tastes as your peers. But yes, you can trust them or not, but you want to work with someone you trust. You want to work with someone who will respect and will respect you back. You want to work with someone who has a, if you will, cultural alignment to these values and will treat you and their peers well. That's what I mean by making sure you end up working with someone you like. Because you're not going to end up working with buddies. That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and you may not want to work with all your buddies too, depending how crazy or wild they might be. What's one trait that you wish you could instill in every employee that works for you?
I would say never become complacent. And to set differently, I would say keep on learning and make sure that you're always looking at things from a different perspective. The outgoing president gave me some advice, and I really value the advice he gave me. But he said, part of what I'm going to miss here is the fact that I'm going to be putting in a fight every day. That the ambition that you come in to either face a challenge or solve a problem. And that meant that individual went in with the mindset that, he was going to learn and have to, if you will, do something new every day. And that's one thing. Yeah.
So he's going to miss that fight every day. And I love that. I mean, that's what you want in a leader. And obviously you can instill that in your employees. That's going to instill a very proactive mindset And man, if we can adopt that for ourselves, that would be huge. Now, building on a proactive mindset, there are a lot of employees out there, I was one of them, that had big ideas. I have a lot of ideas. My family sometimes tells me to turn off the idea machine, but they have a big idea and they want to present it to the C-suite, or they want to make a change or something for their job or for their team or for the whole company. What do you recommend for them in terms of how to communicate that idea to the C-suite?
That's a good question, because I think we've all been in those shoes before. There was a time when I was pitching to the C-suite myself, and I would say it's interesting how either my idea is not sticking or I don't know what's wrong. And so
something's not happening.
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
Yeah. But I noticed one thing, first and foremost, and this was very evident at Honeywell, right back at the time when Dave Cote was there. He had folks he had surrounded him with who knew him, knew how to speak to him, and knew how to appeal to him, if you will, the human aspect of it. So if someone's going to be pitching to the C-suite, I always suggest that they actually know their leadership so they can approach them the right way. Very important. I think also the second piece is make it simple, show its value. Right. Right now, for example, there's this whole thing of, if you will, in supply chain tracking, serialization versus other areas of how to basically perform tracking in the supply chain. And there are so many C-suites, if you will, that remain almost, confused by all the alternatives out there. And we really want to make sure, from my perspective, someone comes to me with an idea, it's clear, it's simple, and I can see its value. So that requires a bit of homework. That requires some good preparation and definitely some good messaging. Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. So know the leadership that surrounds them, know the leader, make the ideas simple and share their value. A lot of employees can get so into the technical details because they're reading that stuff every day. They forget that the CEOs has to know a lot about a lot of things. And so simplifying it, I think there's a lot of power in that. And you've had a lot of people work for you throughout your career. Obviously, you've had some people that have been burned out along the way. When you see that, when you see someone's burned out, how do you approach that situation? Well, the first thing, and Ben, you know a lot more about this than I do, but the first thing is that the burnout can happen for a number of different reasons, right? Yeah. But probably the burnout, if you will, that sticks out the most is that individual who loves their job, is highly motivated, does a good job, and at the same time, for some reason, has reached a point where they feel overwhelmed, and consequently they're burned out, right? That's probably the number one individual that generally hits my radar. And so the one piece of advice I will always share with them is learn how to ask for help. I think that's good. That's important advice, because especially in U.S. corporate culture, a lot of times asking for help is a sign of weakness. Like you can't do it yourself. You're asking for help. I think it's powerful. I mean, if you as the senior leader of the company, you give that advice to employees who are overwhelmed, I think that's really powerful coming from you. Because a lot of companies, again, I think they struggle with that. So I think that's some really amazing advice. One of the things and tell me if this is not, if you don't want to answer this, so without naming names, what's a colorful story of a time when someone quit or got fired in your organization? No names, please. But you'll always find those who, for disciplinary reasons, get fired, and those are unfortunate events. Probably the more notable events when someone ends up leaving their job is either because there was a an event that happened outside their control that affected them, right? And that by itself, all of a sudden, is, wow, look what happened. Nobody saw that coming, right? So that's one thing. And the other is where something, lack of a better term, very political happened, and as a result of someone will end up walking with the blame, right? So
wrong place at the wrong time,
wrong team, yeah. And so you see it in large projects, especially when a company, and this was a big thing at Honeywell, I think it's a good model, is to implement change, you need to implement change through project work. Change of improvement really happens in these large organizations with an established operation through project work, a separate, kind of dedicated effort with, specific objectives in mind and expected outcome that should happen. And when things don't work out, and there could be many, many reasons why, there is a restructuring happening, and you see folks often leave the company as a result of that. And many times, they're perfectly, competent individuals. It's just that, things didn't turn out, their way, so to speak. But I can't think about, a very specific, colorful event. Ben,
what I hear you saying in that is that, hey, being fired, it seems like you're talking a lot about being fired from an organization. When someone's fired from an organization, I think sometimes they carry shame with that, or they feel bad about themselves. What you're pointing out a lot of times is this just happens because organizational fit with the project and the person and the time may not just be there. It sounds like. So I think that's a good message for people to hear too.
Ben, let me differ with you. Individuals don't carry shame. What happens is that the organizations, and this is a human thing, individuals, let's call it in the remaining organization, for lack of a better term, badmouth that individual, place blame on that individual. And so that individual is perceived all of a sudden from an outsider's perspective as, yeah, that person is to be blamed, and consequently, they should be shameful. The reality is that you never know what happened, right? And that's why there is this listen to the other side of the story, right? That really matters. But nobody under these set of circumstances should feel shamed by losing the role.
I think that's a really powerful message for people to hear from someone who's president of the organization, who's seen this, because I think that alone can give people more peace of mind, give them confidence, and just the encouragement to keep going if they are in a situation where they're fired. And with the pandemic that happened, listeners may be listening to this years after this interview. So we had the pandemic, and many people did lose their jobs. And I think that's a really positive message of hope for them. So
and especially, in this situation, the one piece that I will share with you, Ben, it's very important to me, is because of the pandemic, there will be a lot of very good people out there, competent people with solid skills who may end up losing their job. And, a job change like that will affect their confidence, right? And nobody should lose their confidence if they can, avoid it, and strive towards maintaining that confidence, which is what will make them good in their next gig.
Bam. Put a cherry on it. Boom. I like that. All right, let's move on. Victor, I know you don't have a ton of time, so I do want to have a couple more questions here. Over the years, what's been your biggest source of inspiration? And then if you could share with us, what's a challenging time that I got you through?
Role models, I would say, is by far the biggest source of inspiration in different ways. Dealing with senior leaders who are there and understanding their thought process. If anyone has the opportunity to being coached and mentored by senior leaders, is a great thing. Allow you to kind of gain perspective and also share anecdotal evidence of what they went through themselves. I mean, that's a great source of inspiration. I was very fortunate in that I've had a few mentors like that through my career, and I was able to share with them challenges. They challenged me back, and as a result of that, I saw a lot of growth. But I would say above and beyond everything I've done, I think role models are by far the biggest source of inspiration I have had.
And what type of advice do you have for people who are in a situation where you're listening to say, okay, Victor says role models inspired him. Frankly, I don't have any role models. I want to find, or I don't have positive role models. What's a first step that they should do if they don't really have somebody in their life like that?
I can relate to that, Ben. That's a very good point. And I think that there's a lot of folks who may find themselves in that situation. Look for one.
Get on the search. Don't just
Right.
be passive about it.
Correct.
Who's maybe one of your top role models that comes to mind?
I have to go back to my Honeywell days. I would say number one was Dave Cody. A very level-headed individual. He was very good on how to deal with adversity, but at the same time was very good at challenging us back. Kept a very professional profile throughout the organization. And the one thing about him that I always admired was the fact that he was very comfortable dealing with, uncertainty. Because when you're, handling a company that big and you're in that position, uncertainty and something that's going to certainly, affect you and could affect you. Earlier on in his tenure, every time he spoke to the analysts, the stock price went down. And he would keep on telling us, it just takes a matter of time before the analysts will believe what you're actually telling them. You just have to get there. He got there. And eventually, every time he spoke to the analysts, that then, the stock went up, skyrocketing over $100 per unit. But that's definitely one thing that I admire from him.
Well, that's a great story about him too. So it sounds like he had a real vision.
He did.
And despite the adversity, he kept going, and he knew how to handle the uncertainty. What books, newsletters, magazines, or websites do you recommend for someone who's in the C-suite or new to the C-suite, or someone that just wants to be there eventually, on a mission to get there?
Without anyone in mind, I think biographies have always been a very important source of knowledge. I think a lot of the books about business are fairly stale. But it's always important to stay.
Not the Quit Alternative, though. The Quit Alternative book I hear is I'm plugging my own book on Victor's interview. I guess I should stop that. That's not a stale one, Victor.
All right, sounds good. I didn't say all of them. I said a lot of them.
Okay. Just a lot are stale. Yes. Are there any? So you can't leave me hanging on biographies, and there might be other than the Quit Alternative, any business books or anything specific that pops in your mind?
Yeah, I recently completed reading the. I would say I think 3 or 4 versions of Ulysses S. Grant life. There was a new version that was published before Hamilton by this author Ron Chernow. Yeah, and that's a very interesting one because, to summarize it, you got a leader who, very successful as a public servant. He was also a soldier, but whenever he tried his hand at business, he failed. That was interesting. So, and he had certainly a huge impact on our country. But that's a huge lesson, right, of someone who was pursuing what they liked versus what they had to do or thought they had to do, and the different outcomes they experienced. On the business side, I've read a number of books. Recently, I picked up a book called Leadership Presence. And I read it about, I think, 10 years ago. I read it again, and I can't say enough about that book. I have to apologize that I have not read The Quit Alternative, Ben, so I can't say much about that right now.
We're going to have to edit that comment out, please. Well, you always have loved your job. No, that I will say, for everybody listening, I'll make sure to put Leadership Presence and the Grant biography in the show notes for you to.
I think so, yeah.
What, and I love to ask this question. Sometimes it stumps people, but what's a tool or gadget that has contributed to your success that my listeners could check out, other than the Quit Alternative? Although that's a book, not a gadget.
It's funny. I got myself. We're all tied to our cell phone, right? And one of the biggest things or complaints that I had about cell phone usage was the fact that I had faulty communication. Breaking up, interrupt conversations, and it just felt like the cell phone was not completely delivering, if you will, on its promise of mobility. Right, I could be anywhere.
Yeah, it's not working.
But one of the things I found is it's actually this gadget, which is one of those Bluetooth-enabled speakers.
Okay.
And I can stop anywhere I want as long as it's a quiet and private place, and host a conference call. And to the other listeners, come across as I've been, my own office.
Mm-hmm.
So it has really helped me be very mobile.
Two-way?
Two-way. Yeah.
Okay, so in other words, it's Bluetooth to your computer, but they can hear you and you can hear them through the same speaker. Right?
Bluetooth to my cell phone, actually.
Oh, cell phone. Okay.
So it turns my cell phone into a conference room speaker type.
Because you have a speakerphone button on your cell phone, but this device makes it louder, I guess, and has a better mic on it.
Yeah.
What did I not ask you today that I should have asked you as we wrap up here?
Ben, I'm honored that you asked me to speak, and this is my first, if you will, role as a leader, for a company, and it's very exciting and it's very energizing. I'm very energized about it, and so I know that I'm liking my job from those two, if you will, emotional reactions. I would say that I hope my own advice helps me as well as others as I go through this learning journey.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Victor. Nice job today. And I look forward to part 2.
All right.
We'll catch up after you've been doing this a little while longer on this.
All right. Sounds good. All right, Ben.
Ben Fanning is a #1 best-selling author, Inc. magazine columnist, and CEO of the Fanning Group, an international consultancy and corporate training company. To learn how they can help your organization, go to benfanning.com.